Hi everyone. We're here to talk AI in the defence, intelligence and law enforcement context. We hope to have a kind of lively discussion. I've got a very esteemed panel of people with me who I'll ask to introduce themselves shortly. My name is John Byers. I'm the head of AI at an international law firm called Osborne Clarke. I travel a lot to the States, but you can detect my British accent. And I do work in the defence and intelligence sector. I work predominantly in the private sector with some very large defence companies, so not really in the governmental space. AI in this sector raises all sorts of emotive tropes, doesn't it? From the future crime of Minority Report with predictive analytics to automated warfare and Terminator 2. And hopefully what we're going to do on this panel is bring it down to a more prosaic and practical level, but highlight some of the real issues involved in deploying artificial intelligence and machine learning in this space. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my panel to introduce themselves, describe a little bit of how their career intersects with AI, and what they see as a real hot issue in the space. And we'll pick up these hot issues in a fuller discussion shortly. But I'm going to hand over to Kate.
Perfect, thank you so much. Good morning, afternoon. I am Kate Mckenzie. I am Senior Counsel with the Department of Justice, the Office of Privacy and Civil Liberties. Prior to joining that office, I was a national security attorney working on FISA issues. And prior to that, I was a criminal prosecutor up in New York City. So my background is law enforcement, national security, and privacy. In my role now, I handle the AI portfolio for my office, and I do a lot of policy work in terms of AI governance. I run a working group on facial recognition technology and what that looks like in the law enforcement and national security space. So in terms of hot topics, I think facial recognition technology is a very hot topic, particularly when you're talking about law enforcement. Another hot topic and sort of a challenge that I think we struggle with in the law enforcement, intelligence, defense world is the fact that by the very nature of our work, we can't tell the public what we're doing with a lot of our technology, right? We can't be as transparent as some private sector corporations can do, because it would fundamentally impede our ability to do our mission. So that's a real struggle for us and something that I think is worth discussing. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kate.
Yeah, so by way of introduction, I used to lead an advanced AI team at IBM, did my last startup, which was Amazon's first AI-related acquisition that birthed what many people know as Alexa. Alexa's my older sister's name, and the code name for it was Pryon. Since then, I was doing an Eisenhower Fellowship under General Colin Powell to study the intersection between IC, DoD, venture capital, startups, and companies in terms of how that works. We're the legacy human language technologies team at IBM, and this company that did media mining for Langley and call mining for NSA.
Hello, my name is Eileen Vidrine, and I have the honor to serve as the Chief Data and AI Officer for the Department of the Air Force. Today, the Department of the Air Force is a military department with two services, United States Air Force and United States Space Force. And it's really about, I think my portfolio is about driving innovation in the data and AI space to really work smart, but also focused on our defense mission. And we do that working across military services and departments. So it's really about us working as a team holistically to drive that innovation together.
Good afternoon, everybody. Captain Brian Erickson, I'm the Chief Data and AI Officer for the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm a first generation Chief or CDAO. And you had mentioned, what about your background, intersects with AI? I'm actually a helicopter pilot. The majority of my time has been flying helicopters, and I flew fixed wing as well. And then only in the last 2 years have I had the privilege to serve as the Coast Guard's first Chief Data and AI Officer. But I think that the intersection is that I'm an operator, and bringing operational tools by using AI and a better data foundation is definitely a pain point for me. As when I was operating, getting that artificial intelligence at the edge was something that we just had a lot of trouble doing, and we're trying to make some strides there. So As a Coast Guardsman, I'm a member of one of the armed forces, so but the only member or the only armed force that's outside the Department of Defense. So often I do a lot of work with my defense counterparts like Eileen, as well as law enforcement agencies within the Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you very much, Brian. So we're going to kind of leap in right at the deep end with the topic du jour, which of course is generative AI, which everyone's talking about. And I listened to you with great interest, Igor, at the discussion that we had earlier on in the general session. But I'm going to direct my first question to you, which is, what do you think the potential issues are, and actually the advantages as well of rolling out generative AI in this sector, given all of the kind of press hyperbole around these systems?
Well, I'll start simple. There's more issues than benefits. And it's not new. Here, I'll give you a surprise. In the 70s, NSA speech recognition existed, okay? And they found something that would allow them to reduce the compute required to monitor the world by 50%, literally half the amount of compute necessary. In any of your organizations, if you would discover some sort of scientific advancement that would allow you to reduce your compute requirements by half, you would get supermax promoted, you'd write papers, you'd be standing on stages bigger than these, and the whole world would fet you. Here's the problem. You know what they discovered? The minute that any Russian citizen uttered the word mother on an intercept, you could drop the call. You didn't have to worry about it anymore. They weren't going to talk about something sensitive. But you can't use that knowledge, because if you have an insider threat, what does a Russian adversary do? Mother, 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 and then let's talk about troop movements and things of that sort. So it's a more peculiar environment. So when you talk about these style of things, there's so much of that you have to worry about. And again, that's without you being able to say anything. So I'm acting as your mouthpiece for some of these things. That's some of the issues associated with it, architectural.
That's great. Thank you. Eileen, do you want to kind of add to that?
So I would say that for us, it's about there's great capabilities, and how do we leverage it at the speed of mission? And how do we build confidence so that we can get to yes? I go back to, I spent several years working in the Intel community myself, and the default answer was no. And so it's really about how do we get to yes to support this? And part of that is we have kind of focused on what I call responsible use of AI. So and that's every airman and guardian's responsibility, is that ethical principles that have been laid out by the Department of Defense to make things responsible, accountable, transparent, and really making sure that from strategic to tactical, we're looking at that responsible component. It's not just flipping a switch, and it's really a human in the loop. And yesterday, one of my airmen, super smart, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Chapa, our chief responsible AI person, he happens to be a pilot who has his PhD from Oxford in ethics and morality. He's a philosopher and an ethicist. And to bring that operational perspective to our policy, I think really helps our airmen and guardians to really look from that operational perspective of ethical use.
Great, that's fantastic, thank you. Brian, I'm going to switch to you now. I know in previous discussions we've talked about issues, and you've mentioned the importance of edge computing in this space. I don't know whether you want to kind of clarify that statement. I can see the importance of having compute actually in the helicopter that you're flying. Do you want to?
Yeah. Let me just talk a little bit about that. I think that some of the opportunity to come to conferences like this by the Coast Guard, by myself, is to just kind of share, hey, some of the areas where we have some pain points with industry, and make sure that partnership grows and gets stronger. One of the areas that I can see throughout my time as an operator, as well as the last couple of years as a CDAO, is kind of going on that last mile and integrating within existing legacy systems. And I'll give you an example. So helicopters or C-130 aircraft are flying around. We're looking for small objects, people, overturned kayaks. You can imagine this is a perfect opportunity for computer vision. There's going to require a lot of training. We're a small force, and we actually partner with DoD to train models. But sometimes DoD is looking for different things than we are with some of our domestic missions. So we kind of have to branch off and start, conducting some of that development ourselves, and then integrating those models into pre-existing proprietary systems that are on some of our ships and aircraft. Have been, some of the struggles. So those are some of the areas where I think that we've been a little slow to adopt edge computing, and that's where we're going to get maybe some of our largest value in our very work operation intensive organization.
That's great, thank you. And again, in previous conversations with you, we've talked about the importance of education and awareness in the sector, and how. And Eileen, you used a specific term to very artfully describe lack of awareness without making it too pejorative. And I can't remember what it was, but it was quite a nice, gentle term. But the question is, how do we go about raising what is perceived to be a generally low awareness of the implications of this technology in the defence, intelligence, and law enforcement community, and how are you guys doing it in the Air Force?
Well, I like to say that we have a multi-generational workforce, so we have to take a multi-pronged approach. So you have to be all in, and you have to be committed to what I call career-long learning. I think that if all of us waited to upskill in AI, probably wouldn't be in our roles. So you kind of have to be ready. But you also have to think a little bit differently. So one of the great investments that I'm pretty proud that our department has done is we actually set up an AI accelerator at MIT on the campus. So we have airmen and guardians right now today working side by side with some of our nation's smartest AI researchers to bring an operational perspective to the research, and they co-publish together. And then we scale that out in our proving ground. We take academic experiments and then bring it to an air base, specifically Eglin Air Force Base, to scale it out. But we have to invest at all levels. So we also have just finished piloting our first round of what I would call an AI for national security leaders. So it's an executive, senior executive, general officer course, and we do that together. And I say that together, we invite our colleagues from the different services, from our coalition partners, and together we're doing executive education. So it's really, I would say, ground, digital university, upskilling, at the tactical level, all the way to the strategic. And what I really am most excited about is that our leaders are all in. And so when we stood up our online digital university, just upskilling department, the former chief of space operations, John Raymond, 4-star general, took Python coding, like leadership by example. And so I think that it's you have to be all in at all levels. And I think that it for what I'm finding, it's working, because you can pick the point of entry that you need to be at and then just go fast. And
in your view, do you think it needs to include ethical training? Because ethics are talked about a lot in this context.
I think that that is part of it. It's not the only answer, but responsible AI is everybody's responsibility. Every airman, every guardian across are responsible. So it's really, it has to be part of our core DNA as we move forward to make sure that we have that human in the loop. at the appropriate time at the speed of mission.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and I completely agree with Eileen, but it's not like we just figured out that there's a need to pay attention to ethics. I mean, your service members, in the armed forces, we've been dealing with ethics on, a number of topics throughout the years, privacy and biological weapons. Like, this is not day one on ethics training for our military forces. And so I would say that we rolled that ethical issues, or rather the idea of ensuring that ethics is wrapped in everything that we do, into our data and AI strategy. So just at the very, very core principles of our strategy, we have that rolled in there. And I would just go back to say one more thing. Our organization is just getting up to speed. Again, I'm the first chief data and artificial intelligence officer the organization ever had. Nobody was really looking at the organization through this lens before. So there wasn't this type of collaboration between the armed forces. And so Eileen was talking about the MIT AI Accelerator. We want to put a Coast Guardsman in there. Eileen and I just went up yesterday when we had a tour up at an Air Force base at Nellis Air Force Base, looking at a number of activities that they're doing, which is some amazing stuff to the depth for which our organization will never have. The only way the Coast Guard is going to be able to support the warfighter is to ensure that we are conducting joint operations together at all times. And I think that this the CDAO kind of brings a lot of partnership to our agencies that haven't even been there before.
That's great, thank you. So let's switch to autonomy and a sort of broader philosophical question, which I'll direct to you, Igor. Clearly, we're at a point now where more autonomy can be handed to defence and offensive systems, and of course, the kind of holy grail of this is the lethal autonomous system, which the machine that can make it a kill decision, which is kind of at the top of the or the pinnacle of ethical discussion. But my question is, how do we keep humans relevant and in the loop and avoid the tendency for humans to check out if a machine is making these kinds of decisions? What's your view of this, Igor?
Yeah, and I want to build on what they've said. So I do deliver an AI literacy course for the DoD acquisitions officers and things of that sort. In the first half of it, you would have no idea that it belongs in anything related to the technology industry. You know why? I show them pictures of where I was born and my grandparents, where I went to school and things of that sort. Heck, I would put in there what my favorite restaurant is, and spoiler alert, there is a chocolate eclair involved. And then halfway through it, they're curious. They're wondering, why are you showing all this stuff? Here's why. There's no AI regulation, nothing. And even if there was, it's a black box. You wouldn't even know if I did something properly or not. So instead of talking to people and asking how their tech works, right? Hey, did you use this model or that? And how does this algorithm, what are you trained, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's somebody holding the purse strings and controlling in terms of what's happening. And it's ultimately a human, as you just mentioned, that has to be a fundamental part of the loop with appropriate training, credibility, ethics, clearances, and things of that sort. That's an arbiter of whether it's going to be in this way and that way. Here's the 3 phases of grief for you. Phase 1 with AI, what do we do with it? Discovery, search, and things of that sort. Phase 2, okay, fine, you found something interesting, execute a workflow of some sort. And then what ends up happening? Then we start thinking about an automation. It's a mimic for what humans can do. I'll give you a perfect example. Does anybody hand you the keys to a Honda Accord when you're 2 years old? They don't, all right? But what do we start doing? We start interacting with the world. We start learning with the world. And then somebody gives us a plastic little race car to drive, and we're playing with little toys. And then we eventually get a bicycle. And then eventually we get a learner's permit and things of that sort. And only then are we autonomous humans that get given keys where they trust us now that we can keep ourselves safe and we're not going to damage, life and property around us as well. So it's a crawl, walk, run situation when you think about automation.
That's great. And you did mention kind of lack of regulation in the space. And I guess, and Kate, I'm going to pick up you as the lead on this question. what is your view on sector-specific regulation? Is there a need for sector-specific regulation in this space? And can you give us a view on the wider regulatory trends?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, AI regulation is rapidly evolving. I will say the US approach traditionally, particularly with regard to things such as privacy, has been a very sector-specific approach, right? We have laws that regulate specific sectors. That has been our approach. The European approach is very different, right? In the EU, they have the GDPR, which is comprehensive privacy legislation and it applies to all sectors rather than taking this more patchwork approach that we've taken. So what I can say, and I can't say that one is necessarily right and the other is wrong. I think both have unique qualities that serve different populations and serve different functions. But I will say, with regard to law enforcement, defense, and intelligence, sector-specific is required. There is no one-size-fits-all when you're talking about law enforcement, intelligence, and defense equities. It's just not practical. Like I said before, we have to do a lot of our work behind closed doors in order to keep you safe. We have to do that. It's different than the banking industry. It's different than healthcare, right? Our very mission requires a level of secrecy. As a result, I think that specific regulation that recognizes that in the context of law enforcement, national security, and defense is going to be critical. Now, there can be some broad strokes, very large sort of umbrella regulation, as it were. But I do think we need to be more thoughtful when we're thinking about how that would be applied in this particular context.
Okay. Eileen, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, last year I had an amazing opportunity to actually work on federal policy, serving as a strategic advisor to the federal CIO. And it was really about bringing an operational perspective to policy. So we've seen some documents come out at the federal level come out, and I think we're going to see more. And then we as leaders have opportunities to add an additional layer where applicable, because we want to make sure that we have the right overarching policy from a government perspective. And then we as leaders in our sectors have opportunities to make sure that we're adding that additional layer where applicable and where necessary, so that we have that unifying piece moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I see, flying the British flag briefly, that the UK has actually now got a Centre for Defence and Artificial Intelligence, which has the Ministry of Defence involved in it, and a code of conduct in relation to the use of artificial intelligence in military applications. So it really, the US is in that same space. So essentially, what you're saying, but putting together a federal policy for AI in the defense space. And
we know that different, like the Federal CIO Council, the Office of Science Technology Policy, last year we saw OSTP actually put out the AI blueprint, the AI Bill of Rights document published for the federal public. But I think we're going to see more guidance that has been collaboratively developed, whether it's the Federal CIO Council, the Federal Chief Data Officer Council. I think that we're seeing great collaboration across various mission areas to make sure that we get policy correct, so that people have an opportunity to bring that voice.
Speaking of voices.
Go ahead. So, well, if you say it to me, and I'll repeat it to the audience.
The question I have is, how do you guys temper your sense of urgency with knowing the exponential advancements of the technology with the pace at which the institutions work? So how do you guys, one, temper your sense of urgency? And the follow-up question to that would also be is, there's a lot of talk in the marketplace of maybe we should take a pause so that we can regulate
what's happening within the LLM generative AI space, but there are countries like Russia and China that are not taking that pause and don't necessarily have the same moral compass or ethical values that we have. So serving as in the roles that you guys do for the government agencies and knowing that there is a lot of work happening behind the scenes, how are you guys connecting the dots with the potential global threat and tempering the sense of urgency because of the pace at which these government agencies move, but knowing that the technological advancements are moving with or without us?
That's. I'm just going to throw in my two pennyworths to that question because I think. No. I think it's a fantastic question. I'm going to talk while the panel has time to kind of assemble their thoughts.
You're not throwing pennies. You're throwing pences out. But go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's a hugely important but essentially philosophical question, and I think the problem that we have in countries such as the United States, the UK, the European Union, is that we are fundamentally democracies, and we value the rule of law, and we respect human rights, and inevitably that is going to create a fetter on what we can do with these technologies, and those fetters do not exist in countries such as Russia and China because they do not observe the same rule of law and they are not democracies. So unfortunately, I tend to be. I share your pessimism. I think Igor, you were talking sort of pessimistically in your general session earlier. This is going to put our societies at an inherent disadvantage in terms of what we can do with the technologies. And it's a very, very, I don't know whether there's a clear answer to it, but it's a very intractable problem.
Musk is a slippery eel, okay? He wants to slow things down so he can catch up, right? You heard my story where they weren't moving fast enough and I wanted to push it forward as well. You have to be a little bit of a contrarian in some ways.
So I would just say that I think it's important to keep in mind the perspective that this is not a new problem, right? Technology is always outpacing law and regulation, right? This is something that we have dealt with before. It is something we will continue to deal with. That's why we have a lot of policies in place already governing our use of technology in terms of how we can develop it, how we can deploy it, situations where we can use it and situations where we can't, recognizing that we follow the rule of law and human rights. And so I just think it's less of a problem than it might appear from the outset, right? Because this isn't new to us. We're used to doing this. We're used to working with brand new emerging technologies. There are technologies that all of our agencies are using that we can't even talk about yet, right? So it's not even dreamt of in terms of future regulation. So that would be my thought on it.
The federal government gets a bad rap.
Yes.
Okay, but let me say why. You know, when I first started this company in 2017, I remember talking to a room like this in Silicon Valley, and I'm like, I don't even know why there was an R&D team left at Meta/Facebook, right? So let's not hide behind the flag and say, hey, here we are. You know, we support democracies and things like that. When we have big tech companies that A/B test, putting good and bad news in front of teenagers, causing teen suicides, right? And that's why, you know, I appreciate their comments on you know, ethical responsibility and this and that. It's something you need to know from the inside out. Nature, nurture. It should be embedded in you. It shouldn't be something you have to be trained or get continuing education credits. You either know how to do it or not, right? I can make a tool, right? A hammer. Who do you want me to hand it to? I want to hand it to Jimmy Carter to build Habitat for Humanity. I do not want to put it in Ted Bundy's hands. But guess what? I get a choice. Right? And you need to, you know, in your respective organizations, you get to make that choice as well. Figure it out. And
a very cogent observation. I'm going to hold the questions for a moment because we're going to take I'm going to put Kate on the spot now again on a related issue, which is related to your question, but more specifically directed. And then we're going to talk biometrics because clearly biometrics have a huge role to play. Facial recognition has a huge role to play in law enforcement. What is your view of laws such as BIPA in Illinois, GDPR in Europe, and now the forthcoming European Artificial Intelligence Act that seek to restrict or prohibit the use of biometrics? Can you give us your view?
Sure. I will start by saying this is my view. This is not DOJ view. This is my view. I think, and my position on generalized bans of technology in general, it is not the technology itself that is inherently bad. It is the use case that is problematic. So I think that imposing a blanket prohibition or ban on any kind of technology, fill in the blank, is unwise. I think it is akin to using a hammer when you could be using a scalpel, right? There are many, many incredibly valid use cases of real-time biometric identification that I would argue everyone in this room would support. Identifying when someone, a known terrorist with an active device walks into the Super Bowl. I don't think anyone at the Super Bowl would object to the use of real-time biometric facial identification in that circumstance. A blanket prohibition would stop that from happening. But there are ways to regulate technology that allows for those sensitive use cases to happen, but stops us from using it at a protest, right? So that it's not being used to infringe on people's First Amendment protected activity. So I think that a ban is the easy way out. I think it is easy for regulators to say, I don't want to get involved in this conversation. It's too complicated. There is risk here, so let's ban it. Yes, there is risk. There is always risk. The question is, how can you manage it, and can it be done effectively while still protecting really necessary use cases? You know, the thing about biometrics is, and I'm a privacy lawyer, right? So there are significant privacy concerns about biometrics, right? If someone gets an image of your face likely, hopefully, isn't gonna change all that much. Your fingerprints, not gonna change. Your iris, that's really not gonna change. So that those people have that identifying information about you for the rest of your life. So the stakes are really, really high, which is why we have to be incredibly thoughtful about how we're using this, when we're using it, and how we're protecting that information so it's secure and safe. But the important thing to keep in mind, and I would urge you to go back to the example about the Super Bowl, right? Biometrics are incredibly reliable forms of identification. Law enforcement, intelligence, defense, our mission is to protect the public and safeguard the homeland. That is our job. Our job is to protect you. And if there is a technology that allows us to accurately identify the bad guys, let's use it. Sorry, soapbox dismount, that's my thought.
My eyes never work. My eyes never work in clear lanes because I think it thinks I'm from Transylvania. But just know this, I want to double underline. It's more subtle. An average progressive does not want this anywhere in our city centers, right? Because you don't want a police state. But then come the Capitol attack, we want to find all the knuckleheads. And those are the issues that we're doing.
And I'm going to ask a question to you, Igor, because the government attendees on the panel probably wouldn't answer this question. Clearview AI, discuss, which is kind of related to what we've just been talking about.
Great, another Peter Thiel thing. Uber. What do? They know they're violating the law, but they just go in there and they feel like they'll clean it up with their government affairs folks. That's the Peter Thiel model. They just go out and do it. They know that they're going to be violating the law when they do it, and then they figure that they have enough capital to kind of soothe people and lobby people and everything else. Whereas I don't even start something if I know that I'm violating the law. I don't know, I'm weird, you know?
Great, thank you. Now, I know someone had a question at the back. Who was the guy that had the question? Go ahead.
So my question is about and of course, in this last year, we saw $51 billion of investment into the CHIPS bill, primarily to onshore manufacturing of bleeding edge nodes. I know TSMC is building in Arizona, but I'm concerned that there's not enough that we're putting in or thinking about to not only onshore kind of existing manufacturing, but also invest in the future of semiconductors, especially given the cost of compute for AI being a limiting factor from autonomy to data centers. So I'm curious if there are like agency level considerations or concerns beyond simply onshoring that element of the supply chain, and basically what factors do you think semiconductors play in terms of national security looking forward?
Pryon?
I'm not a technologist, or I'm just a dumb helicopter pilot. If the helicopters can't fly, I care about it. But no, honestly, I just can't take that particular question from my agency.
Eileen?
I'm going to plead the fifth on this one.
I'll be your cousin that can
Thank
say
you.
some things.
I don't know what to say.
All right, I'm editing some stuff. Hold on.
So I'll just say generally while you edit, and I am not really involved in the sort of supply chain world, but I can say generally speaking that there are a lot of factors being taken into consideration, and it's certainly a very important topic for the federal government.
Is your question directed towards resource availability or where these chips come from? Because clearly there are security issues if you're sourcing semiconductors from China. You don't want them to go into federal applications, do you?
Beyond simply offshoring this, I'm curious with respect to the ability of semiconductors, where the source of them, what are the considerations you want to adjust in the factors that the United States should be considering as a source of factors?
All right, I'll give you a time frame. So some of these chip companies are investors in us. All right, so here's the time frame. You have nice jet black hair. I appreciate you. 12 years from now, you'll feel okay. The problem is, from now to then, it's going to take a while because these things do take a while to bring it forward. So I was having coffee with the former CEO of Bank of America. When he was trying to turn it from a regional to a national bank, he was telling me how he had to plow through one state first in order to happen. And he had all his economists studying that state to find out what the gross state product. And they came back to him with a very simple thing: oil. So is Texas. The whole thing, he didn't need any other numbers other than knowing what the price of a barrel of oil. So yeah, all this Taiwan nonsense, it's only one thing. That's where little GPUs are born. That's it. There's nothing else. It goes to one thing. Now, yeah, we are building domestic, but guess what? It's not 3 nanometer yet. It's going to take a while until we get the good stuff. And by the way, all the good stuff's just Apple with a little bit of Intel anyway, so nobody's really going to be able to access. And who knows about that LK99, which I know you can't talk about, whether it's real or not real. So there's a lot of exciting stuff moving around.
We are facing practical reality, aren't we? With Taiwan holding kind of 90% of the fab
And you
market.
talked about the chips. It goes deeper than that. It's a critical mineral. I know you can't talk about that. So it's deeper than that.
We have time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap. So go ahead.
Hi, Hannah McDaniels, retired U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service in support of national defense. I would like to understand how you balance the investment in what we do to protect Taiwan versus the investment in what this gentleman was talking about and bringing the chip manufacturing and those capabilities back to the United States.
Okay, she looked at me. Guess what? You can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay, and at that point, I think I'm going to wrap the session. So thanks very much indeed.